Gluten-free.
Yeah.
Another question up there.
Yeah, my question is, did you consider not inventing another identity for online? I mean, it would seem to me that if you wanted truly not to be found, you'd stay away from the internet entirely. But that wasn't your challenge, I gather.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. If you want to avoid being caught by your IP address, for example, you do not go online. I mean, that is the best thing for you to do. But at the same time, if you think about, it's one thing to think about escaping for a month, but if you think about trying to start over in your life, you're saying you're not going to go online, for the indefinite future. And my thought was, well, if I actually did want to abandon my life in the manner of someone who, let's say, fakes their own death, I wouldn't want to start over as a hermit. I like being online. I like using email. I like these things. So I wanted to see what the challenge would be if I did continue to use them, if I lived a life that was sort of parallel to my own, but with a different name.
This is a question for Evan. What did you expect to be difficult but found to be easy?
I think that, think about that. I thought would be difficult and easy. I mean, the getting around was easier than I expected, partly because, I had a problem at first because I wanted to take Amtrak a lot, but Amtrak has an ID requirement. I didn't realize it had an ID requirement, but then that was really scary at first. But then I realized how, paper thin that requirement actually is, where no one's ever really paying attention. It's like this habitual security measure that if you think about it, it doesn't really even accomplish anything. Like anyone can have an ID, and the fact that I show you an ID doesn't tell you anything about what I'm going to do or anything. So once I realized that they weren't really paying attention and that I could kind of talk my way around it wherever I went, then taking Amtrak, even though they asked for ID, it was easy. And also, it was surprisingly easy. I thought it was going to be a problem to convince people that I was who I said I was, and that's why I had all this, elaborate setup of web pages and Facebook accounts and all that sort of thing. But people are pretty trusting, and they're not automatically suspicious of you. So even though oftentimes I was doing sort of weird things, the band that I hitched a ride with, they wondered, and they told me later they did wonder, what is this guy doing? Like, why is he going across the country? He seems to have no purpose. He's like too old for this, and also his goatee's died. Like, what is he trying to like relive his youth or something? But it didn't seem like I was doing any harm. So, and everyone I encountered, they had a sort of natural trust that I guess if I thought about it, it makes sense. You don't automatically assume someone's giving you a fake name. But then later, I felt really guilty about it. So I actually went back and I had to apologize to everyone that I had interacted with over the course of a month that I could find. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. I mean, people are trusting in part because you're a white guy who looks like a generic American in a certain way.
Well, that was a whole other part of it, which, for better or worse, is not the genre of sort of Wired magazine topics. But, I mean, of course, like the easiest way to disappear in America is to be marginalized and part of a marginalized community. Like, right. It's almost like a foreign notion to someone that you should try to disappear when you're sort of already feeling like right. You have no resources, no one's paying attention. So, and that also carried over into I could talk my way into doing things and being places where people weren't suspicious of me just because of the way I look or the way
right.
I was dressed.
Was that part of the reason why that Tae-Ching Se piece was so great? Because here's a guy who's sort of performing his invisibility as a work of art in a certain way. But anyway. There's another question up there.
All right, well, two questions. The first one's dumb. What was the name of the band? And the second one is you said people were trying to formulate ideas and things about where you're going and what you're doing. What were some of the wilder, more outlandish theories?
So the name of the band is the Hermit Thrushes. They're from Philadelphia. They're a really small band, but they're really great. They play kind of like art rock, as they called it, like indie rock, but very experimental. They were fun. They would play bars with just 2 or 3 people in like Lubbock, Texas, and then take off their shirts and their pants and like dance around. It was fun stuff.
And you've talked to them since the article came out of
Yes, not only have I talked to them, I went to see one of their shows in Brooklyn, and then they invited me to come on tour with them again. And so the wilder theories, I mean, people were, I mean, it was wild in terms of the way that they would think I was somewhere. And it was interesting how the information that was totally unverified would sort of, people would start to gather around it. So if someone would start a rumor that I was in Seattle, then other people would feed off of it, and then other people who entered the conversation later would not realize that it was based on a completely unfounded piece of information, and then they would sort of start, you know, putting up flyers and doing things like that. I think the big theory, that the prevailing theory for the better part of 3 or 4 days was that I was in Hawaii, and I had previously lived in Hawaii, and so that made some sense. But they had this theory that I had taken a cruise ship to Hawaii, which was remarkable to me because I'd actually considered the possibility of doing that. But if anyone bothered to look it up, the time it takes to get to Hawaii in a cruise ship would not account for the time that elapsed. And eventually someone said, wait, this is not possible. They had already skipped that step. And they were already looking at places in Hawaii where I might be, and which island is he on, and is he in the old place where he lived before, and things like that. So yeah, that was probably the furthest afield.
Sometime before your article was in Wired magazine, there was a large spread in Wired about the disappearance of Jim Gray, the Microsoft scientist. In any way, did his disappearance inspire your project?
I mean, not in any conscious, excuse me, not in any conscious way that I can think of. That was a great piece, and that was a tragic story. But you know, his was a case of, you know, lost at sea. And the interesting thing in that case, and why it made such a compelling story, was that he was a high-tech guy, and he had all these friends in high-tech, and they basically employed every possible resource that they could bring to bear on it, and they still couldn't find him. So I don't know, maybe it did. I think I've been collecting these fake death stories for years and years, so I was already sort of looking for an end. But it certainly may have given my editors, you know, a reason to accept it.
I'm wondering about the stories that you told people about this new identity, and if that was fun. Did you make up anything about your college experience, or like what was the small talk like when you were interacting, meeting people at bars or something like that? Was it hard to keep it straight too?
It was hard to keep it straight, and I will say that I thought that would be fun, and it was not. It absolutely was not fun. Partly because it's nerve-wracking. I mean, I commend to you to try this. Like, try to go introduce yourself to someone, even just using a different name. It feels like such a fundamental deception because you're so used to introducing yourself as yourself, telling your story, you know, reaching back into your memory to make connections. Oh, I've been to Minneapolis. I came through here when I was driving across the country. And then to try to shut all that down and make things up. You know, it's fun when you're sitting at home doing it and saying, I was developing backstories, and I'll say that I went to school here, and I would always use things that I had knowledge of, so that if someone challenged me, oh, my brother went to Georgia Tech, you know, then I would say, oh, well, yeah, you know, what dorm was he in? And I had some knowledge about it, even though I didn't go there. But when I actually had to tell people these stories, I couldn't really connect with them, because at a certain point, I didn't really want to talk about myself, and I didn't want to respond in the way that you would normally respond to people. I wanted to shut the conversation down and move it in another direction or make them talk about themselves. So it ended up being, I was having such superficial relationships with the people that I was encountering. I mean, even though, I mean, naturally I was just meeting them, so it'd be superficial anyway, but even beyond that, it was sort of like, it wasn't real, and it felt, you know, guilty.
There's one right there.
Hello. As you talked, the one thing that kind of thought back on is when the Unabomber case was going on. It was really when they started turning evidence over to the public and having people could look at his handwriting, and when that manifesto came out and his brother read it and said, this is his writing style. hey, this is him. You see, like going to see the CIA. I mean, I really see more the FBI being able to turn evidence like that over to the general public. And has anybody ever talked to you about something like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly several investigators told me that the best investigative tool that's evolved over the last 10 or 20 years is America's Most Wanted. I mean, the U.S. Marshals will tell you that. I mean, they have pretty good resources. They're incredibly good at finding people, fugitives on the run, but it's a whole different thing when you can put their picture on TV and details about them, manipulated pictures of what they might look like now, and then put it out to millions of people. And then afterwards, there were some ideas that the people who had, especially the core of people who had worked so hard to find me and were really, really good at it and had turned up so many clues, they would get together and sort of develop a website that would help find actual missing people, which was it was actually kind of a source of embarrassment for part of it. People are putting up flyers about me, and there are actually real missing people who aren't getting the same resources, and I think they felt the same way. But the problem is always, investigators, government investigators, they don't want to give away that information until they're absolutely the most desperate to find someone. So, they'll do the wanted poster and things like that, but they don't actually want to give away that investigative material. In the Unabomber case, that was years and years after they were just completely desperate, and it was fruitless. They weren't able to find this guy that they thought, well, let's just try this.